If you are just going to do the same thing all the time, you're not going to be prepared to take a punch. There's nowhere for you to pivot. And this is why throughout the season, when things are even going well, but they're going well in a certain way, XJ and I have harped on the idea that the Knicks are not playing the long game and they're not focusing on the things that will prepare them for these hard-nosed series that require winning in multiple ways.
Remember, we have talked about this before. We talked about problem identification and how important that is to determining what your solution is going to be. What you identify as the problem dictates your range and variety of solutions that you think about incorporating. And Tibbs has identified the problem as not enough rebounding and not getting foul calls. And so that is a problem for me because I don't think that that's what the problem is. I think it's the stuff that you and I have been talking about since August of 2024 after they acquired Karl-Anthony Towns and looking forward and projecting how this team might be deployed. And it's gone exactly that way. And unfortunately, it is catching up to them now.
I actually think losing game 2 was better for them than winning game 2 was. I believe that the best chance that the Knicks have of making big strategic changes, whether that's leaning more into size lineups, whether that's leaning more into shooting lineups, I think they needed a wake-up call loss like this to force those adjustments.
If we see this Knicks team in the Eastern Conference Finals this season, let's say, we may look back to that game 2 for the Pistons and say it was after that point that they shook everything up. We'll see if they go in a different direction or they just double down on the approach that Tibbs has kind of come forward with. This is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA and break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host XJ. As always, I'm joined by my brilliant co-host Geoff. Geoff, we are going to break down the Knicks to start this series, the Knicks and Pistons series, but we are going to spend a lot of time kind of looking forward and breaking down the keys for the series moving forward, given that game 3 is coming right up. Definitely appreciate you guys and our audience being here. I want to start the show by saying, I know there's like so much content about this series, about the Knicks, talking about the playoffs, all of that stuff. I like to think that we bring unique perspectives here at Hot Hand Theory, and there are things that we're bringing up that aren't being explored or talked about elsewhere. But at the same time, I do not take for granted anyone's time with what they choose to watch and listen to. There's only so many hours in the day that you have. So really appreciate your time being here with us. And we really hope to kind of bring up a few things that I haven't heard talked about elsewhere. Geoff, anything you want to say before we dive right in?
No, that was great. I'm sure the things we talk about will be talked about elsewhere down the line. It's been great, and you guys did a great job. The Casual Friday reunion last week, that was awesome, and made me so happy to see positive feedback, showing appreciation for us getting off the couch and recording this stuff for you. Just super excited to talk about this Knicks Pistons series, because even though it's been ugly, it's actually a really interesting one from just a strategy standpoint, and that's kind of our wheelhouse. So let's just hop right in.
That sounds good. Yes, definitely a big shout out to Mensa and Sean for coming on the pod, and big shout out to you, Geoff, for pushing that to happen. I said that on the pod, and it was like, we talked about it, and I was like, should it be the 3 of us? Should it be all 4 of us? And you were like, it should be a true casual Friday reunion. So big shout out to you for that. That all aside, Geoff, there's a million places that we could start. I have some thoughts in mind, but as usual, I will give you the honors. Where do you want to start with first, kind of recapping what's happened in the series before we start to talk about what's next for the rest of what is now a 5-game series?
This is a really interesting series, because I was the one who got on here and said, I gave the numbers to y'all. The Pistons since January 1st are way better than the Knicks have been since January 1st, which is over half the season. And yet the line before the series was the Knicks were 4-1 favorites. And my point of bringing those numbers up was to simultaneously highlight how well the Pistons have played, but also to highlight that the Knicks approach needs to be good if they wanted to win this series at the level that the odds makers thought they should win this series. I actually think the Pistons have not played that well in 2 games. And I think you can make the argument that they should be up 2-0. I think this is closer to the Pistons being up 2-0 than a 1-1 series. And I think more than anything, it really shines a light on just how poor the Knicks' approach has been to start these first 2 games. Like every worry, every concern you could possibly have from a strategy standpoint and an execution standpoint, I think they've actualized all of those concerns. And I mean, we're gonna hop into them. But my main takeaway is the same thing I've been saying on this show for the whole season, and the same thing I've been saying about this coach since I was on video at Strickland, since I was doing stuff with Strickland. If you are just going to do the same thing all the time, you're not going to be prepared to take a punch. There's nowhere for you to pivot. And the Knicks had the same lineup play over 25% of its non-garbage time possessions in a season, which might be a record. I mean, I didn't look into it, but that very well could just be the highest mark ever, or like of this century. It's a ridiculous number. And the fallout is that when other things are required, like when the coach brings up, we got killed on the glass, we need more rebounding. Well, Mitchell Robinson and Karl-Anthony Towns shared the court together for 5 minutes. So you can't say we need more rebounding and then not have an answer for more rebounding. You can't just be doing the same thing over and over again. That's problem A for the Knicks. And there are other problems B, C, and D, but it starts there. It starts with that rigidity, and it stems from the season-long rigidity. What you're seeing right now is the value of schematic, strategic, tactical diversity and versatility. And this is why throughout the season, when things are even going well, but they're going well in a certain way, XJ and I have harped on the idea that the Knicks are not playing the long game, and they're not focusing on the things that will prepare them for these hard-nosed series that require winning in multiple ways. And I think that's really, really being exposed in these first 2 games.
Yeah, you mentioned that the line before the series was, the Knicks were 4-1 favorites. So actually, also the impact metrics that are really good and strong and validated ways of evaluating player skill level and ability and impact. Those metrics across the board, all of the best ones that we know of, had the Knicks winning in 5 games. I had the Knicks winning in 5 games. Secondly, to the Knicks winning in 5 games for those metrics was the Knicks winning in 6 games. Thirdly, in terms of probabilities for the Knicks winning in 5 games and 6 games was the Knicks winning in 4 games. So it is critical to understand that those metrics are based on talent. Those are based on talent. Those are based on the impacts of the players involved in the series, what the minutes per game are expected to be, all of those things. That is how they come up with those formulas and those probabilities. The other part that can't really be accounted for within those metrics are deployment. And so to me, that makes up the end of what we see in differences is, obviously there's luck factors. Can't account for that. So if a team is just shooting extremely hot and it's just blazing the nets, hey, sometimes it happens. That's the NBA. That is not what we've seen. That is not what we've seen. And so you have the talent of the players, you have luck factors, and you have deployment. Those are the 3 primary factors that go into most of these outcomes. And what we've seen is, the talent is the talent. That is how good the players are. We haven't seen tremendous luck factors on the part of like the Pistons in terms of shooting luck or anything incredible like that. And the other factor is deployment. And the Knicks have not deployed the team well, as we've talked about the entire season, as Geoff mentioned. And we're seeing those things come home to roost. And it's unfortunate. I do think the scary thing for the Knicks, and I do think the Knicks will still win this series and potentially in 6 games still, or, maybe in 7. The scary thing for the Knicks is that Detroit has not played well. Like, a few stats. So less than a third of the Pistons shots across the first 2 games have come from 3. So very low volume on threes. And yet they're only shooting 34.5% on those attempts. Like, that's low volume and low percentage success rate. That's not a good formula for winning games. It actually makes sense for them because they have one elite shooter that they paid $6 million for, who people told us wasn't worth it, and that they understood why he didn't have very many options in Malik Beasley. Clearly one of the elite shooters in the entire NBA and one of Detroit's most highest impact players. And the rest are either streaky shooters, Tim Hardaway Jr., who had a terrible game 2 and was completely unplayable in that game, or bad shooters or non-shooters. But what's happening is Detroit is getting a ton of action on the interior, and they're crushing the Knicks inside. And it is not just because, as you kind of alluded to, we're not seeing a ton of the double big lineups that some people thought we were destined to see in this series, but there's a ton of transition offense happening on the part of the Pistons, especially off of live rebounds. They're number 1 in the playoffs so far in terms of percentage of live ball rebounds that result in transition plays. So they're pushing the ball constantly, even off of makes. Number 2, I talked at length about this before the series, about how much Detroit screens. I don't know if I talked about it on this podcast. I did a guest appearance, and I talked about Detroit screening and how important that is. They have 30.5 screen assist points per game so far in this series. The leader in the regular season had 25 per game. They're 5.5 over the leader in the regular season. The leader in the regular season was the Detroit Pistons. They are screening away. They are screening and creating havoc, allowing their players to attack the rim, to get inside, to get Cade and Schroeder downhill. And switching defensively is a way to short circuit a screen heavy team, but it's questionable how much the Knicks have a tolerance for mismatches. And if the Knicks can't score, that's not really going to help them. That's not going to help them. The purpose of switching and tolerating mismatches is because you imagine the other team can't keep up with you by scoring in isolation the entire game. If the Knicks are going to score the way that they have, Detroit probably could. So that's not even necessarily a good solution in of itself without offensive improvements. I thought that Tobias Harris has been like the best player across 2 games for the Pistons. Like, his defense has been really good. His shooting's obviously been really good, aside from the game 2 from 3. I thought that Cade's just been like, okay. I don't think he's been very good in either game. And game 1, I thought he was just bad. And game 2, I think not great despite his like high scoring output. And I think he's just been trying to force a lot of shots despite the attention that's being paid on him. Dennis Schroeder, we had a comment from a Pistons fan on our preview podcast about how important Schroeder has been for them since coming over. And I thought, it's kind of a little bit overblown. I don't think Schroeder's been amazing. Schroeder is absolutely critical for them. And so shout out to that person. Like I said, Hardaway was completely unplayable, and he's one of their best non-big screeners. And I thought that would be really critical for them without having Isaiah Stewart. But he had like the worst game of the playoffs or something like that. And Dennis Schroeder made up all the difference and was able to continue to apply pressure off of pick and rolls, getting downhill, creating shots for teammates when Cade was just kind of babysitting, or OG was babysitting Cade the entire time and ball denying and having the Knicks play 4-on-4. So I just think it's bizarre that the Pistons haven't played particularly well. The only reason they're not up 2-0 is because the Knicks went on a crazy run and it seemed like the Pistons completely melted down. And despite almost melting down again, they still pulled out that win. So this is to me, I don't know if you think the Knicks are in big trouble. I don't think the Knicks are in big trouble. I think they're still winning the series in 6 or 7 games. But the fact that you're talking about 6 or 7 games with the Pistons is, I think, really problematic in terms of what it means moving forward in the playoffs for the Knicks.
So you didn't even mention Asar Thompson, who also has been unplayable.
He's been terrible, yeah.
He's been awful.
And was one of their best players and been terrible.
Yeah. And like, you can tell Brunson's antics are just completely in his head in game 2. And offensively, I mean, it's not like he was super great offensively throughout the regular season, but I think that in a playoff matchup against a coach like Tom Thibodeau, who likes to exploit those types of non-shooters, which is very interesting that he understands that on that end, but doesn't seem to get that other teams can do that to his non-shooters on the other end. But I digress. Asar Thompson has basically hurt them a lot and their spacing. And I do think that it's artificially elevated the Knicks defense and what they're able to do when he's on the court. As far as overall takeaways go, or like where I'm at in this series, I'm sort of where I was at the start of the series, and that's that I think the Knicks are going to have to improve their approach, and they're going to have to come close to optimizing their approach. I will say, though, and this might be like a hot take or just slightly below, lukewarm take, I actually think losing game 2 was better for them than winning game 2 was. And it's going to sound crazy to some people. Did their chances of losing this series increase? Of course it did. They lost home court advantage. They're now slightly less likely to make it out of round 1. But to me, getting out of round 1 was never the goal for this team. I don't really care about getting to round 1 and then losing to Boston in round 2. I think, and I've thought this the whole season, and I know a lot of people disagree with this, I think that this roster can contend for a championship. I truly believe that. I think they need to be deployed in the maximal way. And they didn't do that all season. So obviously, through all season we talked about this theoretical ceiling, and that's what it was, theoretical. In my personal opinion, I believe that the best chance that the Knicks have of altering the paradigm and just making big strategic changes, whether that's leaning more into size lineups, whether that's leaning more into shooting lineups, whether that's, and we're going to talk about this in a bit, whether that's adjusting how Jalen Brunson plays basketball a little bit. I think they needed a wake-up call loss like this to force those adjustments, as crazy as that may be. Shouldn't be that way, but but we've seen all season long that Tibbs clearly believes that this is plan A. They needed something to force them into plan B. And is it going to happen? I'm not positive of that, but I do think that the chances that they start playing in a way that gives them a slightly better chance of beating the Boston Celtics required a loss like the one they took at home in game 2 against the Pistons.
Unless plan B is just play Josh Hart the entire game, which it very well may be.
Could be. They need more rebounding, so he just has to play more.
That might be the case. But I think it's an interesting perspective. It definitely speaks to how much of a macro thinker you are in terms of where you're looking as far as Knicks' overall chances to advance deep into the postseason and potentially contend for a championship in this season. And for that matter, I think for me, it also reflects a similar thing because I totally agree with you. I think that the Knicks needed and it could be most beneficial for them. If we see this Knicks team in the Eastern Conference Finals this season, let's say, we may look back to that game 2 for the Pistons and say it was after that point that they shook everything up. They changed everything up. They started going to spacing lineups. Josh Hart started playing 30 minutes per game instead of 40. They went to double bigs more often. They made sure Cat started getting up, 7 threes per 75 possessions instead of 3 or whatever it is. It could be the case.
2 in game 2.
Yeah.
In the whole game.
That's preposterous. Like I do. And this is always sticking with me. And you mentioned it the last time we talked, and it was about how, and I should have looked this person up because we had someone on Twitter kind of mention how Tibbs is basically playing Karl-Anthony Towns in the Julius Randle role. And it's hilarious because it's so accurate. It's so funny. It's like at that point, Julius Randle would be preferable to have than Karl-Anthony Towns because Julius Randle is better at being Julius Randle than Karl-Anthony Towns is at being Julius Randle. So if you're not going to even forget about maximizing, forget about optimizing his abilities and putting him in the ideal chances to be the best version of himself, which would be at the 5 in a full 5-out lineup where he's the primary both benefactor and beneficiary of elite spacing. Forget about that, even that dynamic. He is being pushed to a suppressive situation for himself to where he's basically, and not that he's hurting the team, like he's still an incredible scorer. He can still do things at an incredibly high level. I think he's played very well defensively in a lot of cases. He's being like maximally suppressed at this point. It is tough to watch. And I do think that the Knicks will need to make big changes. But remember, we have talked about this before. We talked about problem identification and how important that is to determining what your solution is going to be. What you identify as the problem dictates your range and variety of solutions that you think about incorporating. And Tibbs has identified the problem as not enough rebounding and not getting foul calls. Those are where he's identified this problem. And just hearing him talk, it sounds like he believes if they get foul calls and if they get more rebounds, that is sufficient to win this series, and that's actually what they need. So that is not the biggest indicator to me that he's going to change things up dramatically, go in a different direction, aside from playing Mitchell Robinson more, which could be sufficient to win the series. But that is something to watch out for. When I listen to coaching press conferences, there's typically not a lot to take away. But one thing I do take away is listening out for where their problem identification is, not what they say their solutions are going to be, because they may not always want to share that with you. And that makes sense from a strategic standpoint, but they may oftentimes say what they think the problem is. And that is what Tibbs has identified as the problem. So that is a problem for me, because I don't think that that's what the problem is. I think it's the stuff that you and I have been talking about since August of 2024, before this season started, after they acquired Karl-Anthony Towns, and looking forward and projecting how this team might be deployed. And it's gone exactly that way. And unfortunately, it is catching up to them now. We'll see if they go in a different direction or they just double down on the approach that Tibbs has kind of come forward with.
Yeah, I could definitely see an outcome where the answer is just playing Mitch more. And I could see that being enough. Mitch is really good. I think he's played well in these first two games. In the minutes he's played, he's been impactful. One thing I want to touch on, you brought up cutting Josh Hart's minutes back from 40 to 30 minutes. It's interesting because you would think that when a player sees their minutes elevated in the way that Hart's have been, that would be the coach amplifying his role and amplifying his impact. But in the same way that you talked about Towns and his impact being suppressed, I would argue Hart's impact is being suppressed too. Like, he's basically only being featured in these lineups where his warts are being amplified. Like, if all he does is play in 4+1s for the most part, he doesn't share the court. Like, they try to separate Mitch and Hart. I know it's tough when Hart basically plays the whole game, but I do think that the majority of Hart's minutes come in these 4+1s when Hart's non-shooting is the most detrimental factor to offense. Like, it is the thing that pretty much since that OKC game on January 3rd, every defense has started to focus on, okay, well, we can just keep our big in the paint and play 5-on-4 when Hart's off the ball. With that being said, people have asked, well, if he's hurting you, why, if he's hurting you in those lineups, isn't he hurting you more when he's on the court with Mitch? And I would argue that when you have a guy like Mitchell Robinson, who operates mostly in the dunker spot, he's not great on the short roll because you don't trust his hands, you don't trust his passing. So most of his gravity inside is vertical gravity. It's being a lob threat, and it's on the offensive glass. I would argue that spacing is already not maximized. So Hart's not shooting in those lineups actually isn't hurting you as much. This is why bringing Hart off the bench is actually more palatable for the team, because you get these lineups where his non-shooting isn't as harmful to your overall net. You can almost split it up to having these lineups where it's like the starters with all shooting get to play, and then you bring in the bench lineups that don't feature as much shooting at all, but they have other strengths, and kind of both units are maximized. What you have right now is no one being maximized. No one on the team is the best version of themselves right now. And I don't mean that in jest at all. We had this conversation months ago. I don't think a single player on the team right now is the best version of themselves from an impact standpoint. That's how much meat on the bone there is for this team. That's why, like, people who roll their eyes when I say that I think they can be a contender, I get it. I get why you're laughing. I get why you're rolling your eyes at me, but I hope you can at least, with an open mind, try to understand just how short I believe this team is falling of what their true ceiling and capabilities are.
Yeah, what you're saying is why the Pistons have been better with Asar Thompson on the court than they've been with him off the court this season. And that's because that's what they do with Jalen Duren and Asar Thompson. Those two guys combine together to get a ton of rebounds, both offensive and defensive rebounds. And they double down on those strengths as opposed to trying to kind of split the baby and say, we're going to have one bad shooter and try to deal with that, or have, 5 out. They're like, okay, well, we'll just have guys who are bruising on the inside. And that's why Asar Thompson is the player in the league who influences his team's ability to get offensive rebounds the most at the wing position, which is incredible. And that's because they just double down on those strengths. That's why all of their shots on the interior, and they get tons of shots at the rim. They get rebounds and putbacks, and they push the ball in transition to mitigate some of those weaknesses. And so I agree with that approach. I think it's interesting, like, that you think this too, Geoff, because I feel like and I could just totally be misremembering, but I feel like we had a conversation where it was like, I suggested that 5 shooters is more better than 4 shooters plus 1 non, then 4 shooters plus 1 non is better than 3 shooters plus 2 non. And that is something that I believe deeply for the exact reason that you described. So do you feel like you agree with that position, or what?
We 100% had that conversation, and it went the way most of our conversations go when we disagree. I thought about it more, and I was just like, oh, XJ's right.
Okay. That's not what I was expecting you to say. I was just trying to understand
if
there was like a nuance to it.
I hadn't fully thought it out.
Okay, fair enough.
My thinking at the time was just that 3 + 2 gives you double the roamers defensively.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't really thinking about the other positive trade-offs that you could gain from those non-shooters and ways you could mitigate the lack of space, or that going from 5 out to 4 + 1 is just a way steeper fall off from a space perspective than going from 4 + 1 to 3 + 2.
Right.
I just hadn't considered those things. And I was just like, oh, you have modern NBA defenses with now 2 roamers. Like, they're just going to be able to, any of those 3 guys who are good shooters, it's going to be really hard to get them good looks. But I think I was just wrong, and I thought about it more. So
okay, that's fair enough. I thought there was like a nuance, different thing that you were referring to. So that's helpful clarification. But obviously, and we could just both be wrong right now. There's no way to know about it. But yeah, that is the way that I kind of lean as well. So I don't know. I just think it's problematic from the standpoint of the Knicks approach, and I do think that they're going to have to change things up. And I don't want to ask for a prediction because, to me, I really struggle with this whole idea of trying to predict what Tibbs is going to do, or trying to say what the Knicks should do within Tibbs' paradigm. It's much easier for me to say what I think is the optimal or ideal approach for the team. But that being said, this is now a 5-game series, and the Knicks are in a fight of a series, having lost the game at home. What do you think is going to happen if you had to project that?
I think that Tibbs will probably stay the same. And if anything, he'll just lean into the things he's comfortable with more. I do think that they're going to make a very concerted effort to get Towns the ball in game 3. I think that's the loudest criticism, that they're going to find easy solutions to, because the solutions are incredibly easy. It's Karl-Anthony Towns, just get him the freaking ball. So I think that's something from a Detroit standpoint they need to be prepared for. I know I agree with you completely that Tobias Harris has done an admirable job. I think he's made it difficult on Towns in a way that sort of surprised him, his ability to be physical and stay in front of him. I don't think that's going to be an answer, a sustainable answer. And I think they're going to need to put Duren back on Towns. I think they're going to need that size, which is going to just play right into the Knicks' hands, in my opinion, because it's going to let them go back to the Brunson Towns pick and roll. And so what I think the result is going to be is I think the Knicks will still probably win the series in 6 games. But I think it'll be one of those series where it's like they didn't do enough to say, yeah, I think this is a team that can go ahead and push Boston. But that conversation is way down the line. I'm just that you asked for a projection, and that's what I got. I think the Towns thing is really interesting though, because we talk about this a bunch on the side, and I just don't get it. I don't understand it. I don't understand watching the games and just how a guy like him can get frozen out. And I thought that was so intelligent that you brought up the Randall Towns comparison, because it really might just be as simple as they want him to be Randall. He can't be Randall because he's not an advantage creator in the way that Randall is, in terms of drawing those doubles and finding kickouts as smoothly as Randall does. And then they just devolve to, all right, Brunson, this just means more usage for you because you're the only one who can do the Randall thing.
Yep.
And if it's that simple, that's insane mismanagement. That is insane mismanagement. Like to a degree that I cannot wrap my head around, because these are like millionaires being paid by in a $1 billion organization. I can't fathom that at all. I can't believe it.
I think that's it. I think you identified it. I think that's exactly what it is. And if I had to guess, if I had to say if I had to put my money on something, I think it is that. I think it is that they want, quote unquote, advantage creators, guys who can create an advantage out of thin air. You give them the ball and they create you an advantage. And that person can either kick out for three or somehow make the advantage keep going until they can convert it. And that is not Towns' skill set. Although he can do that from the post, we know that he can really post up and have success against mostly anyone down there, given enough space. That's just not his game. And because of that, they revert to Brunson. They say, well, you can't do it. Bridges and OG maybe can to some extent, but to varying levels, are aggressive enough to do it with Brunson on the court. So Brunson, you just do it, and that's it. And I do think that that's what's happening. And maybe that sounds simplistic, but that is my criticism, is that it is very simplistic, their approach, and that's problematic for their long-term interest in potentially doing anything this playoff. So if I had to guess one thing that's going to change, I do think they'll play Mitchell Robinson more. I think it'll be more, we'll see more Mitchell Robinson, a little bit less Josh Hart. I do think that that's probably going to happen. And otherwise, I think it'll be what you said. I think they're going to try to feed Karl-Anthony Towns, and that may or may not work out. I'm not sure. Like it again, depends on the spacing environment that he's in. But I do think those are probably the two, quote unquote, adjustments that we'll see, and we'll see if we're right or wrong about that. Yeah. Do you want to add on to that?
I was going to change the subject, so I'll let you be the host.
Well, I was going to just kind of change to the subject that we were talking about before we jumped on, that we've kind of seen trickles in here on Twitter and social media and different people talking about to varying extents. And it is something that I think is important, because I think it's going to be a huge topic of conversation in the off season. People are going to have their views, and I think I disagree with it. And I think actually it's an interesting conversation because you and I disagree about it. That conversation, in my opinion, is going to be just like the first level of that conversation is, who is to blame here for the Knicks struggles? And is it the players or is it the coach? But then on a deeper level, I think it'll come down to which of the players. It'll be, the low hanging fruit, obviously, is going to be Karl-Anthony Towns and Mikal Bridges. Those are the guys who are going to get the darts right out of the gates. But then I think as time goes on, it'll go deeper, and because the issue will come across as so fundamental, and it's like, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to upgrade from Bridges to resolve this? How are you going to upgrade from Towns to resolve this? And so I think a lot of it is going to start turning towards Jalen Brunson. And I think it kind of already has to some extent. And I want to be clear before we really dive into this. I don't think it's bad to investigate that. I think that's important. I think we have to critically investigate this and take a very close look at whether that is the primary problem. That's what we do here at Hot Hand Theory. We challenge things that other people often glaze over and take for granted. However, in my opinion, I just don't think with Brunson it's well-founded. I think I think for me and the way I think about it, like my reasoning process doesn't point in his direction. I don't think the evidence points in his direction as the primary or even a primary limiting factor for this team. And to me, it clearly points in the direction of the coach and coaching staff and the approach and not optimizing the team. And so if you want to lay out kind of your thoughts on that, and then I can respond and we can talk about it. I think that, I prefer to give you the first kind of time to express like what you're thinking. So I don't like kind of like unintentionally strawman your perspective.
Yeah. I think the coach and the approach are first and foremost to blame too. So I guess I want to be clear about that up front. I think that's clearly the first place you go to blame. Or blame's a stupid word, whatever, in terms of these specific issues. But where I think we disagree, and I don't know what level we disagree on, I think that Brunson wants to play a certain way. And I've seen no evidence to the contrary. And so, we could look at that 15-game stretch when the Knicks played a very different way. And I think that there could be Tibbs sympathizers or even enthusiasts who in this discussion might want to use that to their argument even stronger than I would. They went 9-6. They had a +4 net rating over that stretch. Since January 1st, they're 9 points better per 100 possessions when Brunson doesn't play. They basically play two different styles of ball with and without Brunson. Do I think Brunson's like a ball hog? No. Do I think he's not as good as the impact metrics say? No. But I just don't know how to decipher and to split up whose responsibility it is to make sure that the style of play is different. And so I guess I actually want to flip it back to you because I don't really have the answer. But it's hard for me to watch these guys play basketball and see, Towns was wide open on this pick and pop and Brunson shot a double-teamed 15-footer. It's on Tibbs to instill a principle into Brunson that he needs to make that pass. Even if that's true, which it is true, because let's be clear, if Brunson did that playing for Joe Mazzulla, it would take like a game, and then all of a sudden that pass would be made every single time, I'd assume, because it's made almost every single time for the Boston Celtics. So I do believe that it is on the coach and the coaching staff to instill these principles, but I also think these are professional basketball players who are the most skilled people in the world, and on some level it is also their responsibility to make these plays. So that's sort of where I struggle with this. I don't really have a clear answer. I just think it's an interesting conversation.
So yeah, I think that's well laid out there. You mentioned Brunson wanting to play a certain way. I think I agree. I think he has specific skills that he trusts in first and foremost. He trusts himself. He trusts his scoring ability. And so his first instinct is probably not to make sort of like what we look at as open, simple passes to open shooters or open players. Oftentimes he thinks he has the advantage and likes his odds with him being the one to finish the play as opposed to passing to somebody else to either finish the play or keep the advantage going. I do agree with that. I think that that's probably true. But that's not all that we see. If that was all that we see, I would still think it's the coach's fault, like largely and first and foremost and pretty much almost exclusively. But we also see players floating inside the 3-point line, well documented by you on our Hot Hand Theory Twitter account. Wings and two guards making poor cuts into the basket, like in towards the rim. We see things that just reflect a poor process to me. A poor process, not good principles or an approach that has been clearly instilled into the team and facilitated and reinforced constantly on a daily basis. And because we see that, to me, that indicates that the players aren't just doing whatever they want and just saying, well, this is what makes me good, and so I do this, or this is what I think makes me good. I think I'm Landry Shamet. I think what makes me good is that I cut baseline instead of staying for an open corner three. And like, if that's what Landry Shamet thinks, then Landry Shamet's been benched for less, Geoff. And so if Landry Shamet thinks that what makes him good is cutting baseline to try to finish a layup at the rim when Jalen Brunson's getting double teamed, then there's a simple solution to that. It is Landry Shamet, watch this film, never do that again. And if you do that again, you will never see the court again. It's pretty simple. And obviously I'm being dramatic about it. You wouldn't say it in that way and make it be like one decision means you'll never play it again. Of course I'm exaggerating. But my point is that the coach has levers to push to help dictate and create the environment that the players play in. And I will say this. There's something I want to talk about, which is passing versatility. This is a data point from B-Ball Index, a metrics that helps quantify the range and variety of passes a player can make. So this is not a perfect measure of like court vision or something like that, but in my opinion, this is strong evidence towards a player's ability to make passes. Jalen Brunson, I don't think is a limited passer. I think he can make all the passes, and he does, just not with the regularity that we would like. He is a 92nd percentile player in passing versatility, and last year he was in the 90th percentile. Guess what player he has been better than the last two seasons? I will fill in the blanks. Tyrese Halliburton in terms of passing versatility. Tyrese Halliburton is a player we think of as like, he can make all the passes, and he can, and he does, and the key is that he makes simple passes, right? And so I know that I believe, and you can correct me, obviously, that your contention is that Brunson is not a willing passer. But it is first important to say that he is a capable passer. He can do it. And this is not a capability issue. He has the ability to make all of these passes that we've seen him pass up. And if we agree on that, if we agree that he has the capacity to do it, then to me, it's a matter of, is he in the environment that fosters him making those decisions, that reinforces him making those decisions, that makes him be more likely to make those decisions. And if he's not in that environment, but he has the capability of doing it, then that is a problem with coaching to me. So that is my big issue. I think the coach needs to create an environment that reinforces and makes it more likely for behaviors like, quick kick out passes and making the simple pass and spacing out, above the line for really excellent shooters. I don't see why you would ever make it such that they wouldn't do that. And it's about patterns, incentives, and frequency that decisions repeat. So that is how I know, to me, it is a coaching issue. It's about shaping the environment so that when these decisions get made, where these decisions get made, it is to help shift those patterns of decision making towards a more ideal approach. And this is a trend that we see in terms of, like I mentioned, guys floating inside the 3-point line for no reason, and guys not spacing out, and Jalen Brunson taking difficult shots just because he's 10 feet closer to the basket than a guy could take a more difficult, a longer distance shot, but a more open shot. And to me, this just reflects that Tibbs does have an approach that he's instilled. This reflects that they're not doing whatever they want. They're doing what Tibbs has instilled, which is getting shots near the rim at all costs, crashing for rebounds, trying to get offensive rebounds, trying to play tough, gritty interior basketball. That is what they're trying to do. It is. I don't think Landry Shamet is of his own accord deciding to cut to the rim and making that read and saying, okay, I got a little space. Let me close the space and get to the rim. I think under Joe Mazzulla, Landry Shamet would have 0 cuts to the rim in that situation. And if you agree with that, that means that it is a coaching issue. That is direct evidence, and not only evidence, that is direct proof, in my opinion, that it is a coaching issue that is causing the environment under which these guys are making those decisions. And that's why I don't think it's a Brunson limitation or a limitation of how he wants to play, even though I agree with you, he probably would prefer to play that way. I don't think that he can only play that way, will only play that way, and under a different coach would play that way at the expense of his team. So that's kind of that's my overarching position. And that's why I think it's very definitively a coaching issue to a much larger extent than it is a Brunson issue. I think it's basically, I don't think we have any evidence that it's a Brunson issue really at all, personally.
See, guys, this is why you just don't disagree with XJ. This is just, this is how it ends up. This is how these conversations go. I don't think I disagree with much of what you said. I just don't know if I can let go of the idea that players have to have some agency out on the court. And to your point, maybe they even if they think they do, or if it seems like they do, maybe subconsciously they don't, because these principles, these suboptimal principles, have been reinforced over and over again, and it's almost robotic to them. I will say, this is kind of funny, I do think the Towns randomly creeping 2 feet inside the arc, I do not believe that is like coaching. I don't believe that is like, oh yeah, why don't you just, I think on some level he's trying to like show his aggression and doesn't believe he's going to get the ball. So he's like starting his way to the rim to like maybe crash for an offensive. But I cannot believe that any coach ever above any level would be like, it'd be good. I know you're behind the 3-point arc, but it'd be good if you just got like a foot close, like
go to KG territory.
Right, exactly. Like, you remember Kevin Garnett? He was a Hall of Famer.
What I want to say to that really quick, because we talked about this a little bit before we jumped on and started recording about Cade Cunningham, and I said, yeah, Cade's not playing he was not playing that great. He's taking shots under double coverage and clearly not making the open pass, and there's no reason for him to be so aggressive despite OG covering him and having help on top of that. Somebody has to be open. And you said, well, how do we blame Cade for that? How do we not blame JB Bickerstaff? It could be Bickerstaff telling him to do that, telling him to be aggressive, or telling him to be himself or do what he thinks. And that's totally true. But I think we can say a guy is not playing well. And that's one thing. I would say when Towns does that, I would say Towns is not playing well. What is he doing? Why is Towns doing that? So he's not playing well. He's not making good decisions. This is terrible. I would say that about Towns. Now, when we say, how can Towns play better? I would not say, well, it's a limitation of Karl-Anthony Towns that he does this dumb shit. I would say he needs a coach to reinforce the idea that he has to stop doing it. That's how he can play better. So you can say he's not playing well. And also when you talk about how he can be better, it is the responsibility of the coach and the coaching staff and their approach and the habits and that they build in on a day in, day out basis, and the reinforcement that they do from film sessions. That is what gets that player to play better. So I think those things aren't mutually exclusive or in conflict with one another, but I think they're consistent. So that's what I would say about the Towns thing. I would say he's doing bad, making bad decisions, clearly, even if he wants to, but he needs a infrastructure, a coaching staff that would push him away from doing that. And I will say again, with Towns, he's at the lowest 3-point volume of his career since like 2018, at which point, who was he coached by? Tom Thibodeau. That I think that's very relevant information.
For sure. So would you say that from the Pistons perspective, it's on Bickerstaff to incentivize or instill a thought process in Cade Cunningham to where if OG Anunoby's on you and he's doing the good job that we know he's capable of, Cade, you got to find someone, you got to make kickouts more. That's on the coach.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah. I don't find actually that shockingly to the people that we disagree all that much. And I think it was an important clarification for you that there isn't a mutual exclusivity between criticizing the player for poor play and expecting the coaching staff to help instill principles that'll make it easier for the player to improve. I will also say that this does kind of muddle up, at least in my opinion, it will muddle up player analysis, and maybe that's a good thing and it makes it more interesting. But like, how do you possibly compare a Derek White or a Peyton Pritchard or even a Jason Tatum, who is a star, who is an unbelievable basketball player? But how can we be 100% sure that if you put Cade Cunningham in Boston or replace Tatum with Cade Cunningham, that Missoula wouldn't be absolutely getting 110% out of Cade Cunningham that we haven't even seen to this point in his young career?
You definitely couldn't. You couldn't be sure about that. But I think there's player talent and skill, and then there's deployment. And that's why I think really critical to my perspective is the fact that Jalen Brunson has this really high passing versatility grade. because it demonstrates he has an ability, right? Like if he was just limited and couldn't make those passes or had really poor court vision or just like the variety of passes that are required, he just doesn't have the skill set to do, then yeah, that is not on coaching. Then it's on coaching to say, what can you do? And then let's emphasize those things. Let's optimize those things. But if he can do those things and that would be best for the team, then it is up to the coach to push him in that direction. Maybe there'll be a player every now and then who's like, no, I don't care. This is what so maybe Cade would go to Boston and say, nah, I'm a ball handler. This is what I do. And I don't think he would take Cade off the ball. Honestly, I do think that's what he's best at, but maybe he would say that and just Mazzulla couldn't get the best out of him. And then maybe that would be on Mazzulla or maybe that would be on Cade. I'm not sure, but I do think it is more muddled. Yeah, I agree with that.
Can I just say also with this passing versatility statistic, it's not that I'm skeptical of it. And I know you weren't saying that Jalen Brunson's a better passer than Tyrese Halliburton, like overall. But I do think that processing anticipation probably should be, you referred to it as making the simple pass. But Tyrese Halliburton doesn't just make the simple passes. He anticipates these Miles Turner pops before anybody else does and almost passes them to the spot to the point where it looks like a simple pass, but there aren't a ton of point guards who are making these passes. It sort of reminds me, this can be a very, very strange analogy, and I'm sure you'll find it dumb, but like I could make the argument that my favorite quarterback of all time, Jay Cutler, has more passing versatility than Tom Brady. Like, just because of like pure arm talent and just the ridiculous arm that Jay Cutler had and how he could, every once in a while he was capable of throwing this rocket, this 30-yard out rocket that maybe Tom Brady, arguably the greatest quarterback of all time, maybe couldn't. But Tom Brady was an elite processor, maybe the best the game's ever seen, and was extremely intelligent, didn't ever try to force it downfield, and knew just he could dink and dunk, and that's how he was great. So can maybe Jalen Brunson make this wide variety of passes on a level that not a lot of people can't make? Sure, I trust the data point. But has he shown the ability to be a heliocentric guard and spray the ball around in a way that elevates all of his teammates? I don't think we've seen that yet. And maybe it is on the coach. Maybe the coach hasn't properly incentivize him to do so or put him in a place to do so. But I don't think it's totally unreasonable to be skeptical is the wrong word, but to not be 100% sure that he could do that in the same way that a Tyrese Halliburton could run an offense like that.
Yeah, I think all that is totally fair. And I think it's a good point. I think it's pushing me to clarify something. So the Tyrese Halliburton's sort of anticipatory passing that you're describing, I think is a gift that Tyrese Halliburton has. And that is not reflected in passing versatility. Passing versatility is simply the variety of types of passes that a player can make out of different positions and off of drives and all of these variety of passes that have the potential to be made on the court. Can he make those passes? And Brunson can do it. Now, the anticipation, the willingness to pass, the processing, the recognition for when to make those passes, that's not reflected in that metric. And so I think if there was a metric for that, which there wouldn't be, it's not really something you can track via data, Tyrese Halliburton's would be astronomical compared to Jalen Brunson's. Like, that is his literal gift. That is his skill. That somebody else who's like that is Trae Young as well. That is the skill and the gift that they have. Like, Brunson doesn't have that, and so that is a limitation. So Tyrese Halliburton just happens to be his operative phrase, in a system that is perfectly maximizing that gift and skill set that he has. His coaching staff has recognized his gift and skill set and has put him in a position to really to emphasize it and for him to capitalize on it and the team to be better as a result of it. Now, Jalen Brunson, it doesn't have that same skill and gift. He has an attacking isolation, ability to score, craftiness, just a complete scorer skill set, but he does have passing skills. And so to me, I don't say, if Jalen Brunson wanted to, if he had a better coach, he could just turn into Tyrese Halliburton. No, I don't believe that. That's not my claim here. It's that he can make simple passes to open shooters who are above the 3-point line, 10 feet away from him with a clear passing lane. And I think he can do that. And he just needs to do that with more frequency, which would actually make him more of a dangerous scorer as well. You'd be more fearful of bringing two to the ball if you know that he's going to kick it to Karl-Anthony Towns for a wide open 45% 3-point shot attempt. And just doing that a little bit more, creating an environment where he is more incentivized, more reinforced, has more understanding of a deeper approach to basketball that says that doing this makes you better and your teammates better. And that's the change that needs to be made. Not that he could be Tyrese Haliburton or trying to turn him into Tyrese Haliburton. So there's a mediating aspect of that. And the versatility point is just to say that he can make these passes when necessary.
And how sure are we that, would you say you're fairly, if not unequivocally confident that the way the Knicks utilize Jalen Brunson currently isn't actually set up to maximize him and his skill set based on the way he prefers to play and the way he wants to play?
Well, you add the caveat I was going to say, yeah, I was going to say no. And then you added the caveat of how he prefers to play. I think it's a relevant factor of how he prefers to play, but I don't think he's being maximized with respect to his skill set. No, I think if you were to say, well, Jalen Brunson prefers to play in a phone booth, and I was to say, well, I can give him a bunch of space, it wouldn't really matter that he prefers to play in a phone booth. He'd be better with a bunch of space, like that. Maybe that's how he wants to play. And maybe he has free reign to say, Brunson, it's your show, do your thing. And you make all the decisions, and every read is whatever you think it is the right read. But I don't agree with that approach. And if Jalen Brunson were to go to Boston, or Boston was to, Joe Mazzulla was to have some kind of scandal and they fired him, and the Knicks hired him, and then he continued to play this way, I would say, well, now we have strong evidence that this is on Jalen Brunson. We have strong evidence. We've seen other players go to a Mazzulla system and all play in this particular way. And Brunson now in the same system, in the same environment, is not doing it. Then I would say we have strong evidence to say that this is on Brunson. He just refuses to. He wants to play the way he wants to play, and that's what he's going to do. So until that point, I have no reason to believe that it's just something that he can't possibly change, even if he wants to, even if that's his preference.
Yeah, I think that's where I'd fall too, but I think that's a really good clarification by you. And I think, honestly, this is just the beginning of this conversation because, like you said, unless a very specific outcome happens for the season, I think it's going to be a long off season where lots of these types of conversations are being had.
And listen, I agree with you. Listen, we could be surprised in a few weeks, talking about Game 5 of the Knicks and Cavs Eastern Conference Finals, Matt. Like, who knows? And all of that is going to kind of be determined by what happens in these next few games of this series, especially starting in Game 3. So if you're watching this and you've made it to this point, that's awesome. That means you've enjoyed this conversation, and we appreciate having you. Like I said, I really appreciate anybody who spends their time and devotes their time to any of our content. We put a lot of effort and thought into the content. Hopefully that's obvious from our conversation, and we appreciate you listening, and your thoughts would be really appreciated down below in the comments, and we engage with every comment, as you probably know by now. But if you don't and you're watching this far, please subscribe. And we have a ton of more content coming in the playoffs, both Knicks related and non-Knicks related. And we will see what happens the rest of the week. And we'll be we'll see and get in touch with you next week right here on Hot Hand Theory. For Geoff, I am XJ, and this has been Hot Hand Theory.